April 6, 1945. 2,300 hours, 60 miles north of Okinawa. USS Laffey, Fletcher-class destroyer, sat on Radar Picket Station 1, the most dangerous assignment in the U.S. Navy. Her job was to provide early warning of incoming Japanese air attacks, serving as a floating radar station between the invasion fleet and Japanese air bases. It was a suicide mission dressed up as radar duty. Every ship assigned to picket duty knew they'd be the first target for kamikazes. The only question was when, not if. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton, Laffey's captain, stood on the bridge and watched the sunset paint the Pacific blood red. Beautiful. Ominous. "Skipper, you should get some rest," his executive officer suggested. "Tomorrow's going to be rough." Beckton shook his head. "Tomorrow's going to be hell, XO. I want to remember what peaceful looks like." At 0827 hours on April 7th, radar picked up the first contacts. 4 bogies inbound from the north, range 45 miles, closing fast. Then 8 more appeared. Then 16. Then too many to count. The radar operator's voice went tight. "Sir, I'm counting 50-plus contacts, all headed directly for us." Beckton grabbed the 1MC microphone, the ship-wide announcing system. "All hands, this is the captain. We're about to get hit by everything the Japanese have left. You know the drill. Keep your heads, keep fighting, and we'll get through this." Beckton out. What he didn't say. He had no idea if that was true. The battle began at 0830 hours and would last 80 minutes. In that time, USS Laffey would be attacked by 22 individual kamikaze aircraft and would survive what Navy historians would later call the most sustained and intense air attack on a single ship in naval history. The first wave came in low and fast. 4 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, already obsolete but effective when loaded with explosives and a suicidal pilot. Laffey's 5-inch guns opened fire at 12,000 yards. The 40mm Bofors guns joined at 5,000 yards. The 20mm Oerlikon cannons added their fire at 2,000 yards. The lead Val disintegrated under the barrage, pieces of aircraft and pilot raining into the ocean. The second Val took hits and veered off, trailing smoke. The third came straight in, aimed directly at the bridge. "He's not turning! He's not—" The kamikaze struck Laffey's stern at 0839 hours, punching through the fantail and exploding in the aftercrew quarters. 20 men died instantly. Fire erupted from the gaping hole in the ship's structure. Before damage control teams could respond, the 4th Val hit the port side, its bomb exploding inside the aft magazine. The blast killed 8 more men and started secondary fires throughout the stern. Laffey was bleeding, and the Japanese had 18 aircraft left. At 0842 hours, 2 Mitsubishi A6M0s came in from opposite directions, a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the destroyer's defensive fire. The portside guns engaged the Zero coming from the left. The starboard guns engaged the one from the right. Both kamikazes were hit multiple times but kept coming, held on course by dead pilots and gravity. The portside Zero struck the number 3 5-inch gun mount, killing its entire crew. The starboard Zero hit the deck between gun mounts, its bomb exploding and blowing a hole through 3 decks. 4 hits in 12 minutes. Laffey was on fire from bow to stern, listing 7 degrees to port, down by the stern from flooding. Standard damage control doctrine said, "Prepare to abandon ship." Lieutenant Frank Manson, the damage control officer, had different ideas. "Every available man not on a gun gets a hose or starts shoring up bulkheads. I don't care if you're a cook, a clerk, or the admiral's secretary. If you're not shooting, you're fixing. Move." Sailors who'd never trained for damage control found themselves fighting fires with handheld extinguishers. Cooks formed bucket brigades. The ship's paymaster used his jacket to smother burning aviation fuel, and the guns never stopped firing. Gunner's mate First Class Robert Johnson was in charge of the number 2 5-inch mount when a kamikaze struck the mount next to his, killing everyone inside. Shrapnel tore through his mount, wounding 3 of his 5-man crew. Standard procedure, Evacuate wounded, seal the mount, move to backup position. Johnson's response, anybody who can still move, stay on your station. Wounded guys tell the new guys what to do. We're not abandoning this gun while Japs are still in the air. They kept firing. The loader had shrapnel in both legs, but kept passing shells. The trainer's left arm was broken, but he worked the traverse with his right. Johnson himself had burns across his back from the explosion, but kept calling targets. The gun fired 176 rounds during the battle, more than any other mount on the ship, despite being shot to pieces. At 08:51 hours, disaster nearly ended the fight. A Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber came straight down through Laffey's defensive fire, shrugging off hits that would have destroyed a less determined pilot. It struck the bridge superstructure and exploded, destroying the ship's steering controls and killing the helmsman. Laffey went into an uncontrolled turn to starboard, exposing her port side to incoming kamikazes. Captain Becton was thrown against the bulkhead, opening a gash above his eye. Blood poured down his face as he pulled himself upright. "We've lost steering!" Rudders jammed. Without steering, Laffey couldn't maneuver to avoid incoming aircraft. She was a floating target, dead in the water, with 14 more kamikazes inbound. Lieutenant Matthew Darnell, the assistant navigator, made a decision that would save the ship. "Get me to after steering! Now!" After steering was the backup control position deep in the ship's stern, a cramped compartment with manual steering controls. It was also on fire and filling with smoke from the earlier kamikaze hits. Darnell and 3 sailors fought their way through smoke and flames to reach after steering. The compartment was an oven. Temperatures exceeded 140 degrees, and the air was barely breathable. "Rig manual steering. I don't care how hot it is, we need control back." Using chains, pipe wrenches, and brute force, the team reconnected the steering mechanism. Darnell grabbed the manual helm, a wheel that required both hands and all his strength to turn, and waited for orders from the bridge. Captain Becton's voice came through the sound-powered phone. "Darnell, can you steer?" "Yes, sir. Give me a heading. Left full rudder. There's 3 more coming in low on the port side." Laffey heeled over as Darnell cranked the manual helm. The ship responded sluggishly, but turned. The 3 kamikazes, aimed at where Laffey had been, missed and splashed into the ocean. For the next hour, Darnell would steer Laffey manually, working in temperatures that caused 2 of his assistants to pass out from heat exhaustion. Every turn of the helm had to be muscle-powered. Every course correction was a feat of strength. He kept the ship under control while standing in water contaminated with fuel oil and blood, breathing smoke, with the hull around him shaking from explosions and near misses. At 09:07 hours, the 5th kamikaze hit. A 0 came in so low it was almost skimming the waves, making it nearly impossible for the guns to depress low enough to engage it. The 20mm cannons fired anyway, tearing pieces off the aircraft, but it kept coming. It struck the forward gun mount, exploding and killing everyone inside. The blast threw the gun barrel 30 feet through the air. Flames shot up through the mount into the bridge, setting fire to charts and equipment. Seaman Calvin Clower was in the 40mm gun tub, adjacent to the impact. The explosion threw him against the gun shield, breaking 3 ribs and dislocating his shoulder. He got back up and kept loading ammunition. "Clower, you're done. Get to sickbay." "Shut up and keep shooting. I can load with one arm." He stayed on the gun for another 40 minutes, feeding ammunition with his good arm while his dislocated shoulder dangled uselessly. He passed out twice from pain and was slapped awake by his gun captain both times. The gun shot down 2 kamikazes during that period. Clower received the Silver Star. He said later, "What else was I going to do? Sit down and watch? We had Japs to kill." By 09:20 hours, Laffey had been hit 6 times and near missed by at least a dozen bombs. Fires raged throughout the ship. The casualty count was over 50 dead, 70 wounded. Every gun mount had casualties. The bridge was destroyed. Steering was manual. Communications were intermittent, and 8 more kamikazes were inbound. This is the point where ships sink, where crews abandon ship, where captains give the order to evacuate and let the vessel go. Captain Becton, bleeding from his head wound, clothes scorched, surveyed his burning ship through the smoke. His executive officer approached. "Skipper, we've taken catastrophic damage. Recommend we prepare to abandon ship and call for rescue." Becton looked at him like he'd suggested surrendering to the Japanese. "XO, do you see any white flags on this ship?" "No, sir, but—" "Then we're not abandoning. We're going to fight until those bastards run out of planes or we sink. And I'm betting they run out first. Now get back to damage control." The decision to keep fighting rather than abandon ship meant that every sailor aboard had to perform beyond what they'd trained for, beyond what doctrine said was possible, beyond what their bodies could physically endure. Pharmacist's mate, second class Robert Carr, was the senior medical personnel on board. He'd trained to handle casualties in sick bay with proper equipment and assistance. Instead, he was conducting triage on the main deck while kamikazes exploded around him. No morphine. It had been destroyed in a fire. No plasma. The refrigeration unit was shot out. Just bandages, pressure, and prayers. A sailor with a sucking chest wound. "Sorry, this is gonna hurt." Carr packed the wound with a t-shirt and duct-taped it sealed. The sailor survived. A gunner with a shattered femur. "Bite down on this." Carr set the leg using a metal rod and electrical tape. The gunner was back on his mount within 20 minutes, standing on one leg and loading with his arms. A boatswain with second-degree burns across 40% of his body. Carr had nothing to treat burns with. He soaked the man's clothes in seawater, wrapped him in wet canvas, and told him to stay still. The man lived. Carr treated 71 casualties during the battle. He saved 68. He did it with almost no medical supplies under fire, while the deck beneath him shook from explosions. His post-battle report was 3 sentences. Ran out of morphine. Ran out of bandages. Nobody died who didn't have to. The Navy gave him a Bronze Star. He said it should have gone to the sailors who kept fighting after he patched them up. At 0936 hours, kamikaze number 7 struck the afterdeck house, blowing a 10-foot hole in the hull below the waterline. Seawater poured into the engineering spaces. If the flooding couldn't be stopped, Laffey would sink stern first within minutes. Chief Machinist's mate, Howard Hoover, was in the forward engine room when he heard the explosion and felt the ship lurch. He ran aft toward the flooding, grabbing sailors as he went. You, and you, with me. We're going to plug that hole." "Chief, that compartment's flooding. We go in there, we'll drown." "Then hold your breath. Move!" Hoover and his team entered the flooded compartment with the water already chest-high and rising. They could hear the ocean pouring through the hole, a roar like a waterfall. "Collision mats! We're going to stuff this hole like a turkey." Using damage control, mats, mattresses, life jackets, and anything else they could find, the team built a makeshift plug. They hammered wooden wedges around it, then braced it with steel shoring beams. It held. Barely. Water still leaked through, but the catastrophic flooding stopped. "Rig emergency pumps. I want this compartment dry in 10 minutes. They got it down to ankle-deep water in 8 minutes. Hoover refused to leave until the compartment was secure, standing in water contaminated with oil and chemicals that gave him chemical burns on his legs. He received the Navy Cross. He said, "I was just doing my job." The real heroes were the kids who went into that flooding compartment without hesitation. They knew they might drown. They went anyway. At 0943 hours, the 8th kamikaze hit, a valve that struck the base of the forward stack, exploding and destroying the main radio transmission equipment. Laffey could no longer call for help. She was on her own. But the hit also cut through the stack, creating a massive hole that vented smoke from the interior fires. Visibility improved slightly, allowing the gun crews to spot incoming aircraft more effectively. Every disaster created an opportunity. The crew was learning to turn catastrophe into advantage. Gunner Johnson's 5-inch mount, already damaged by shrapnel and operating with wounded crew, scored 3 more kills during the final 20 minutes of battle. They'd learned to lead the targets by instinct, not instruments, since half their optical systems were destroyed. The 40mm gun crews, running low on ammunition, started rationing their fire, shooting only when they had high-probability kills rather than defensive sprays. Their accuracy improved. The 20-millimeter gunners, exhausted and burned, rotated positions every 5 minutes to prevent anyone from passing out. If a gunner collapsed, someone dragged him clear and took his place without missing more than a few seconds of fire. The ship was fighting smarter as the battle wore on, adapting to damage in real time, finding ways to maintain effectiveness despite losses. At 0947 hours, a massive explosion rocked Laffey, but not from a hit. One of the escort carrier's aircraft overhead had shot down a kamikaze directly above the ship. Debris rained down, including a complete engine block that crashed through the deck. Captain Becton watched the debris fall and transmitted to the carrier. "Good shooting, but next time try not to drop presents on my ship." The carrier pilot replied, "Sorry, Laffey. Thought you could use spare parts." Dark humor in the middle of hell. The crew actually laughed. They were too tired, too hurt, too angry to do anything but laugh. At 0949 hours, the final attack came. 4 Zeros in tight formation, diving from 8,000 feet, committed to kamikaze runs. Laffey's remaining guns opened fire simultaneously, a wall of steel that should have shredded the aircraft. The lead Zero took hits and exploded. The second took hits and veered off, crashing into the ocean. The third Zero punched through the defensive fire and struck Laffey's port side amidships, its bomb exploding inside the hull. The blast killed 5 more men and started yet another fire. But it was the last hit Laffey would take. The fourth Zero, damaged by defensive fire, attempted to pull up and come around for another pass. It gained maybe 200 feet of altitude before Gunner Johnson's crew put a 5-inch shell directly into the engine. The aircraft disintegrated. At 0950 hours, the sky was empty. No more contacts on radar. The attack was over. USS Laffey was still afloat. Barely. The damage report was catastrophic: 6 kamikaze hits, 4 bomb hits, 32 dead, 71 wounded. All main guns damaged or destroyed, bridge destroyed, steering manual, massive fires throughout the ship, flooding in multiple compartments. Hull breached in 7 locations, down by the stern, listing 7 degrees. By every metric, Laffey should have sunk. Ships had been lost to less damage. The USS Johnston had been sunk by maybe 3 torpedo hits. The USS Gambier Bay was sunk by multiple shell hits. Laffey had taken 10 direct impacts and was somehow still floating. Captain Becton assessed his ship. She was a floating wreck, burning, listing, barely controllable. But she was his wreck, and he'd be damned if he'd lose her. "All stations, this is the captain. We're going home. I don't care how bad it looks. We're not abandoning this ship. Damage control, get those fires out. Engineering, get me whatever speed you can. Communications, rig semaphore. We'll talk to other ships the old-fashioned way. We're 60 miles from the fleet. Let's go." The journey back to the fleet should have taken 4 hours at Laffey's normal speed. With damaged engines, it took 12. Engineers coaxed 15 knots out of engines that should have been shut down. They bypassed broken steam lines, jury-rigged cooling systems, and ran equipment beyond red line temperatures because stopping meant drifting, and drifting meant sinking. Damage control teams fought fires for 8 straight hours. When they ran out of water from the pumps, they formed bucket brigades from the ocean. When they ran out of foam, they used mattresses to smother flames. When they ran out of everything, they stamped out fires with their boots. Lieutenant Darnell steered the ship manually for the entire journey, his hands blistered, his back screaming in pain. When they finally reached the fleet, he'd turned the manual helm over 3,000 times. Sailors with injuries that should have sent them to sickbay stayed at their stations. Men with broken bones, burns, shrapnel wounds, if they could stand and hold a wrench, they worked. At 2200 hours, USS Laffey limped into the anchorage at Hagushi Bay, Okinawa. She was greeted by incredulous stares from every ship in the fleet. Other destroyers that had been hit once or twice had already been evacuated and were being towed. Laffey had been hit 10 times and sailed home under her own power. Navy salvage experts boarded the next morning to assess the damage. Their preliminary report: this vessel should not be afloat. The structural damage is incompatible with seaworthiness. The flooding should have overcome pumps. The fires should have reached magazines and caused a catastrophic explosion. The casualties should have left insufficient crew to maintain operations. We cannot explain why this ship did not sink. Recommend immediate study of damage control procedures, crew training, and structural design. Whatever they did, we need to teach it to the rest of the fleet. What Laffey's crew did was simple. They refused to quit. When doctrine said abandon ship, they said no. When injuries said stop fighting, they said no. When damage said you're sinking, they said no. They violated regulations, ignored procedures, and did whatever it took to keep their ship alive. They exceeded every physical and mental limit because quitting wasn't an option they'd considered. The repair timeline was estimated at 6 months. Laffey's crew got her combat ready in 3 months by working 18-hour days and fixing things Navy engineers said couldn't be fixed. She returned to combat in July 1945 and served through the end of the war. After the war, she served in Korea, then Vietnam, then was finally decommissioned in 1975. 30 years of service. The ship that should have sunk on April 7, 1945, fought in 3 wars. Today, USS Laffey is a museum ship at Patriots Point, Charleston, South Carolina. Visitors can tour the ship and see the kamikaze damage, scarred metal, patched holes, replaced sections. The docents tell the story of April 7th. They show the gun mounts where crews kept fighting despite casualties. They show after steering where Lieutenant Darnell manually controlled the ship for 12 hours. They show the sick bay where pharmacist's mate Carr saved 68 men with almost no supplies. And they always end the tour at the bridge, where Captain Becton stood for 80 minutes under fire and refused to abandon ship. On the bulkhead is a plaque with Becton's words from that day. "We're not here to sink, we're here to fight. If the Japanese want this ship, they'll have to take it from our dead hands. Until then, we keep shooting." The Japanese hit USS Laffey with 12 torpedoes, 275 bombs, and 22 kamikaze aircraft. Wait, that's wrong. Let me correct it. They tried to hit her with that much. They succeeded with 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. But Laffey didn't just survive. She sailed home, got repaired, and went back to war. Because her crew decided that physics, doctrine, and common sense didn't apply. They had a ship to save, and they weren't interested in anyone's opinion about whether it was possible. The Japanese thought 10 direct hits would sink a destroyer. They learned that American destroyers don't sink when the crew says no. USS Laffey, the ship that refused to die, crewed by men who refused to let her,